If your last blood panel came back with a creatinine of 1.8 and your doctor circled it without really explaining what that means for you long term, this is for you. If you're waking up 3 or 4 times a night to use the bathroom and nobody has connected that to your kidney numbers, this is for you. If your GFR is sitting in stage 3B territory, meaning that number landed somewhere between 30 and 44, and you're starting to wonder what your next decade looks like, stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to walk you through has directly changed outcomes for patients in my clinic. My name is Dr. Chima Okoye. I'm a board-certified nephrologist, and over the past 18 years, I've worked with more than 4,000 patients navigating chronic kidney disease. I want to be upfront with you before we go any further. I am not going to promise that eating a specific food will reverse your kidney disease. Anyone who promises you that is not being honest with you. What I can tell you is that the research on dietary intervention in CKD is more powerful than most people, including most physicians, realize. And there are 5 foods in particular that I recommend to my own patients that have real, measurable science behind them. One of those 5 is going to surprise you. It has surprised colleagues of mine with 20 plus years in nephrology. I won't tell you which one yet, but I'll say this. If you've been handed a standard renal diet sheet, there's a strong chance you've already been told to avoid it. Before we get into the foods, I need you to understand something about what creatinine actually is, because when you understand the mechanism, everything else clicks. Creatinine is a waste product your muscles generate constantly as they burn through energy. Under normal circumstances, your kidneys filter it out and send it into urine without any effort. But when filtration slows down, creatinine builds up in the blood and your GFR, your glomerular filtration rate, drops in proportion. Here's the key thing most people miss. The goal isn't to attack creatinine directly. It's to reduce the burden on the tissue doing the filtering. Take pressure off your kidneys and the numbers follow. That's where food comes in. Food number 1, garlic. The misconception is that garlic is just a flavoring, something that belongs in cooking but not in a clinical conversation. That is wrong, and the science is clear. The active compound in garlic is called allicin, and it's released when garlic is crushed or chopped. Allicin has been shown to reduce oxidative stress in renal tissue, and this matters because oxidative stress is one of the primary drivers of declining kidney function in CKD patients over 60. Your kidneys aren't passively filtering, they're being slowly damaged by inflammatory processes happening at the cellular level, and allicin directly interferes with that cycle. Here's the part nobody tells you. Garlic is also a meaningful lever for blood pressure management, and this is where it becomes specifically valuable in a kidney context. Hypertension is both a cause and a consequence of CKD. It's a two-way relationship that accelerates damage. Research has shown that consistent garlic use can lower systolic blood pressure by 8 to 11 points in some patients. For your kidneys, that reduction in pressure on the glomeruli isn't cosmetic, it is functional. Preparation matters more than most people think. Crush or finely chop the garlic, then let it sit for at least 10 minutes before it hits heat. That resting window is what allows the enzyme allinase to fully convert allen into allicin. Skip that step and cook it immediately, and you've burned off a significant portion of the compound before it ever formed. The most common mistake? Using jarred, pre-minced garlic. A tablespoon of pre-minced jarred garlic has already lost most of its allicin potential because the crushing happened days or weeks ago in a processing facility. Fresh, crushed, rested, that's the version that works. 2 cloves is a reasonable daily amount. Food number 2, red bell peppers. Here's what most people believe, that all peppers are off limits for CKD patients because of potassium concerns. For high potassium vegetables, that concern is legitimate. But red bell peppers are in a genuinely different category. One medium red bell pepper contains approximately 210 milligrams of potassium. Compare that to a medium tomato at around 290 milligrams, or a medium zucchini closer to 295. Red bell peppers are one of the lower potassium produce options available to you, not a food to fear. The mechanism here runs through vitamin C and lycopene, two antioxidants present in high concentrations in red bell peppers that have both been linked to reduced inflammatory markers in CKD patients. Lycopene in particular has shown up in peer-reviewed research as protective against proteinuria, one of the early warning signs that your kidneys are under active stress. The part nobody tells you: red bell peppers also contain meaningful levels of vitamin B6, which supports healthy nerve function. Peripheral neuropathy, the tingling, the numbness in the feet, is a common and underaddressed complication of advancing CKD. Supporting that pathway through food is not a small thing. Raw or lightly roasted is the preparation method that preserves the most benefit. Extended high heat degrades the vitamin C content significantly. The most common mistake people make is roasting them until they're completely soft and caramelized. At that point, you've cooked away a meaningful portion of what made them worth eating in the first place. 10 minutes at moderate heat or raw alongside a meal. That's the move. Now, food number 3 is where things get genuinely interesting, because most renal diet sheets ban this one outright, but the evidence tells a very different story. Buckwheat is the food that gets flagged on nearly every renal diet handout you'll find online, usually lumped in with other grains under a blanket warning about phosphorus and carbohydrates. Here is where the actual science parts ways with the standard advice. Buckwheat is not technically a grain. It is a seed, a pseudo-cereal, and its nutritional profile is meaningfully different from wheat or rice. The compound at the center of the story is called rutin, a flavonoid that has been studied specifically for its renoprotective properties. Rutin inhibits an inflammatory pathway tied to mesangial cell damage, the cells that support the glomeruli, your kidney's filtering units. When those cells are under chronic inflammatory stress, filtration declines. Rutin has demonstrated the ability to slow that process in both animal models and early human studies. Here's the part nobody tells you. Buckwheat has a glycemic index of roughly 51 to 54, depending on preparation. White rice, for comparison, sits at 72 to 73. That gap matters more than most people realize. Every post-meal glucose spike creates a wave of hyperfiltration, your kidneys working in overdrive to compensate for the metabolic load. Over years, that hyperfiltration damages the glomeruli. Swapping buckwheat for white rice is not just a carbohydrate substitution. It is a direct intervention in the inflammatory environment your kidneys are operating inside of. Preparation is simple. Cook whole buckwheat groats in a 2-to-1 water ratio. Bring to a boil, then simmer for 12 minutes. It works as a base the same way rice does, and the flavor is mild enough that most people adapt quickly. The most common mistake is reaching for buckwheat pancake mix or processed buckwheat products and assuming they carry the same benefit. By the time buckwheat has been milled into a refined mix with added sodium and stabilizers, the rutin content has dropped substantially and the glycemic advantage is largely gone. Whole groats cooked fresh. That's the version the research is pointing to. Food number 4, blueberries. The misconception here is that blueberries are a generic antioxidant option, good for you the way most colorful fruit is good for you, but without specific kidney relevance. That undersells them considerably. The mechanism runs through a class of compounds called anthocyanins, the pigments behind that deep blue-purple color. Anthocyanins have been shown to reduce markers of oxidative stress and systemic inflammation, both directly involved in CKD progression. More specifically, they've been studied in relation to NF-kappa B, an inflammatory signaling pathway that, When chronically activated, accelerates kidney fibrosis, the scarring that progressively reduces functional tissue over time. Here's the part nobody tells you. Blueberries are among the lowest potassium fruits available to you. A half-cup serving of fresh blueberries contains roughly 57 milligrams of potassium. A half cup of orange juice delivers approximately 236 milligrams. You are getting a meaningful anti-inflammatory payload from blueberries with a fraction of the potassium burden of fruit options that are routinely labeled heart healthy. Fresh or frozen, both work. Frozen blueberries retain their anthocyanin content well and are often more practical year-round. Eat them whole, add them cold to oatmeal, or blend them minimally. The most common mistake is buying blueberry-flavored yogurts, cereals, or muffins and treating them as equivalent. The processing and added sugars in those products actively counteract what you're reaching for. The whole berry, in its original form, is what has the evidence behind it. Before we get to food number 5, and I want you to stay for this one because it is genuinely the entry that challenges what most people believe they know. I want to ask you something directly. Drop a comment right now with 3 things: your age, your city or country, and your most recent creatinine or GFR number. I go through those comments personally, and I mean that. The patterns I see in this community have shaped which topics I cover next. 30 seconds. Age, location, number. And if you don't currently know your numbers, that is the most important thing we'll address when we get to food 5. Now, I need to say something that ties all of this together, because there is a piece of the kidney health conversation that gets consistently overlooked. And I want to be honest with you about the fact that I overlooked it too, for longer than I should have. What I've observed across 18 years of patient care is this. The people whose creatinine numbers stabilize most reliably are almost never the ones doing the most dramatic interventions. They're the ones managing their evening blood sugar. Uncontrolled post-dinner glucose spikes are one of the leading drivers of progressive kidney damage. When blood sugar climbs and holds elevated through the late evening, it triggers sustained hyperfiltration, your kidneys under mechanical pressure, night after night, year after year. You can eat every food on this list and mean it, and those foods matter. I would not be here if I didn't believe that. But if your evening glucose is routinely spiking unchecked, you are working against yourself. I'll tell you something I don't say lightly. I wish someone had handed me a clear, structured evening framework to give my patients 15 years ago. Not another medication, not another supplement. A daily routine built specifically around the hours that most directly affect blood sugar and kidney filtration. I spent too many years focused on the clinical tools while underestimating what happened in my patients' homes between 7 o'clock and bedtime. That's a regret I carry, and it's why I take this next part seriously. That framework exists, and it's called the 7 p.m. rule, a 21-day evening reset for adults 60 plus with stubborn blood sugar. The program is built around a small number of specific evening habits designed to flatten your post-dinner glucose curve and reduce the hyperfiltration burden on your kidneys over time. The first is a structured post-dinner walk, not an exercise session, a precisely timed and calibrated movement protocol that activates glucose uptake in muscle tissue before your blood sugar reaches its peak. The second is a plate order fix. The sequence in which you eat the components of your meal has a measurable effect on your post-dinner glucose response, and most people have it completely backwards. The third is a set of doctor conversation scripts, practical, field-tested language for bringing your evening glucose patterns into your next nephrology or primary care appointment in a way that actually changes what gets discussed and documented in that room. Here is what I want you to think about. Another year of unmanaged evening spice is not a neutral outcome. It is accumulated filtration stress. It is creatinine inching upward while you're asleep. The interventions that work at stage 3 are measurably less effective at stage 4. That's not a warning I make to alarm you. It is a clinical reality I have watched play out more times than I want to count. The 7 p.m. rule is linked in the description below and pinned comments. Read what is there before you move on. Food 5 is coming, and it is worth your time, but so is the book. Food 5. And I want to be upfront about something before I name it. When I share this particular data with colleagues, including nephrologists with 20 or 30 years of clinical experience, the response I get most consistently is genuine surprise. Not polite acknowledgement, actual surprise. The food is cabbage. I understand why that lands the way it does. Cabbage is inexpensive, it's ordinary, and it doesn't carry the cultural weight of a food anyone would expect to find in a serious clinical conversation. But what happens inside the body when cabbage is consumed, specifically the compound pathway that gets activated, is among the more compelling pieces of nutritional science I've encountered in the context of kidney disease. The misconception is that cabbage belongs on a renal diet simply because it's low in potassium and largely harmless. That framing is accurate and radically incomplete at the same time. Here is the mechanism. Cabbage is a cruciferous vegetable containing compounds called glucosinolates, specifically one called sinigrin. When you cut or chew cabbage, an enzyme called myrosinase is released and converts sinigrin into allyl isothiocyanate, an active compound that triggers the NRF2 pathway in the body. NRF2 is a transcription factor, essentially a master switch that upregulates your body's own antioxidant defense genes, including those expressed in renal tubular cells. This is not the food delivering antioxidants passively. This is the food prompting your kidneys to mount their own internal protective response. Here's the part nobody tells you. Cabbage also shapes the gut microbiome in a way that directly affects kidney function. And this is the piece that most physicians aren't talking about yet. Specific gut bacteria, when the gut environment is disrupted, produce uremic toxins called p-cresyl sulfate and indoxyl sulfate, which are absorbed into the bloodstream and accelerate CKD progression at the cellular level. Cruciferous vegetables modulate the bacterial populations responsible for generating those toxins. Eating cabbage regularly is not just a dietary choice. It is an intervention in the microbial environment your kidneys are constantly being asked to filter against. The comparative number: 1 cup of raw shredded cabbage contains approximately 119 milligrams of potassium. 1 cup of raw broccoli, which activates similar pathways through the same glucosinolate family, delivers around 288 milligrams. Cabbage gets you into this mechanism at less than half the potassium load. Preparation follows the same logic as garlic. Myrosinase, the enzyme responsible for converting sinigrin into the active compound, is heat sensitive. Extended boiling largely destroys it. You want cabbage eaten raw in a slaw, lightly steamed for no more than 5 minutes, or very briefly stir-fried with the texture still intact. The most common mistake is simmering cabbage in a large pot of water until it softens, then discarding that water. At that point, you've deactivated the myrosinase, reduced the glucosinolate content significantly, and poured most of what remained down the drain. Short heat, retained structure. That's the version that does what the research suggests it can. So let's close the loop on all 5. Garlic, crushed and rested before cooking, puts allicin to work against the oxidative stress, actively degrading your kidney tissue. Red bell peppers deliver a lycopene and vitamin C payload at a potassium level that makes them genuinely accessible for most CKD patients. Buckwheat flattens the post-meal glucose curve that drives the hyperfiltration, quietly damaging your glomeruli over time. Blueberries carry anthocyanins that disrupt the inflammatory signaling pathway linked to kidney fibrosis. And cabbage triggers a defense response inside your own renal cells that most people and most physicians have simply never been told is happening. Now, I want to say one more thing before I let you go. Managing kidney disease after 60 carries a particular kind of weight that doesn't always get acknowledged. It's the constant monitoring, the restricted eating that turns every meal into a calculation, the appointments where the numbers shift and you leave holding more uncertainty than you walked in with. And for many of the patients I've sat with over the years, there is something quieter underneath all of that, a nagging sense that something you did or didn't do or didn't catch in time is the reason you're here. I want to speak to that directly. The disease you're managing developed through a convergence of biological processes, genetic predisposition, decades of blood pressure fluctuation, medications taken for unrelated conditions, metabolic changes that were silent long before they ever appeared in a lab result. That is not a story of personal failure. It is the biology of living in a human body for 60 or more years. The exhaustion you feel is real and it is earned. The fear makes complete sense. The self-judgment is the one thing not serving you because it costs energy that belongs to what comes next. And you are already doing what comes next. You are here. If this was worth your time, hit subscribe. I cover this level of detail consistently. And there is more in this conversation that hasn't been said yet. If someone in your life is sitting with these same numbers and this same weight, send this video to them directly, not as a nudge, as something you watched and thought they deserved to see. Drop your biggest CKD question in the comments below, the specific thing you've wanted to ask a nephrologist and haven't had the real opportunity to. Those questions shape future videos, and yours may be the one that drives the next one. And if what I said earlier about evening blood sugar and creatinine opens something up for you, the link for the 7 p.m. rule is right there in the description and pinned comments. It'll be there when you're ready.